why did this third place deck not get first place? Let's find out. And before we get started, of course, if you want to see more historic decks, definitely let me know which ones you like to see in the comments below. Hey everyone, this is Jesse from the Janjo Zone. In this video, this is the premiere episode of historic decks, or whatever I end up calling it. It's probably what I'm going to go with, but we'll see. Where it's a series where instead of me building a deck, having a lot of spice with that, I am looking at big decks, notable decks throughout the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! This isn't just between the first 5 years, this is kind of all-encompassing Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I think there's a lot of cool decks that we should talk about. And the first one I want to go with is the 2003 World Championships. This was the first ever World Championship in Yu-Gi-Oh! And the first big championship worldwide. I mean, you had championships in Japan, and I'm sure you had local stuff in North America, but this was like the first big one. Big. It took place in August. They had their own ban list at the time, but we're not going to talk about the first place deck, because a lot of people have talked about it already, and I may cover that in a future video, and if you'd like to see that, definitely let me know. And we're also not talking about the second place deck either. We're actually talking about the third place deck. So this deck was piloted by Mike Rosenberg, and he actually got third place. He was actually only one of 3 competitors to make it relatively far in this tournament that are from the United States. So he definitely did the best here. The decks are all fairly similar in the top 8 for the World Championships, but there are noticeable differences, and I kind of want to talk about why this deck did not get first place, just going purely off the deck itself. So going off the card by card, you got Exiled Force, Fiber Jar. We have a lot of similar cards you'd see compared to the first place deck. You got your Spirit Reaper, Janjo, Yatagarasu, Sinister Serpent, Sangan, popular cards of the format. The one thing that you do notice that is missing here is the Mystic Tomato. Now with that Mystic Tomato, you aren't going to get your cards out to the field like Sangan, Witch of the Black Forest, or Spirit Reaper. Instead, what Mike decided to use for his floater cards is actually Nimble Momonga, which gives you life points when it's destroyed, and then you can summon 2 from your deck. Now, if there's one already in your hand or one already destroyed, you don't get quite as much advantage. And it only gives out the 1 monster. Sure, you get life points, but you don't get that big benefit of having a Sangan that can search out even more monsters, or Witch that can search out even more monsters, or Spirit Reaper that can just give you a solid defense with a single card. The other notable card here would be Guardian Sphinx. Guardian Sphinx, I've done my own deck about. I do think it's a pretty underrated card throughout retro Yu-Gi-Oh, but it was mostly seen at local levels. You didn't really see it in many top tier decks, and the reason for that is Yatagarasu. The thing with Guardian Sphinx is that it returns monsters your opponent controls to your hand when it's flipped face up. Now with Yatagarasu, when it attacks and inflicts damage, your opponent skips their next draw phase, and this would create the Yata lock, where when your opponent has no cards in their hand, they're stuck forever in this infinite loop. With Guardian Sphinx, when he returns monsters to your hand, you know, any card like White Magical Hat, Kaiku, more so on the beater side of cards, your opponent still has cards to summon, which kind of goes against having the Yata lock. So that definitely hurts his strategy just by having Guardian Sphinx, because the big deck of the 2003 era, of the more specifically Yata format, is the hand control, hand destruction deck. And Guardian Sphinx kind of goes against that, and you have Nimble Momonga, which doesn't help either. Now the build's still good. You know, Mike's clearly a good player to make it this far. I mean, he still has other strong beater cards, Goblin Attack Force, 2 Spear Dragons. Those inflict piercing damage. So you do have decent cards with this. I'm going with the spells. He is running Mirage of Nightmare with only 2 MSTs, but he is running, you know, Harpy's Feather Duster, which is nice. Now he is not running Heavy Storm, which is kind of interesting, but he is running a good amount of traps. Like, there's a lot of traps in this. You see a lot of the staple ones, magic cylinders in there. He's running 2 drop-offs instead of 3. I think 3 was a pretty popular choice. It kind of hurts also too, because if you're having drop-off and still running Guardian Sphinx, I feel like you'd want to run 3 drop-offs, but maybe I'm wrong. And there's a lot of staple cards you see here, things that you kind of expect, because it was such a broken period of time from 2003 through a chunk of 2004 Yu-Gi-Oh! In a side deck, he has a lot of interesting sides. A lot of them are almost seem to be anti-Exodia. Running cards like Cyberjar, Card Destruction, Trap Dust Shoot, which is an interesting card, because at the time, not many people really played it. It came out, I believe, Pharaonic Guardian. And of course, nowadays, everyone knows, like, yeah, it's a really good card. Back then, you had plenty of cards that fit the tempo already. Drop Off, Forceful Sentry, Confiscation, Delinquent Duo. So you didn't really see Trap Dust Shoot. So Mike was actually kind of ahead in the game in this regard, and at least citing Trap Dust Shoot. Other interesting cards are Trap Border Racer, Dark Coffin, Forced Requisition, which I think is a pretty cool card. He is running Kaiku in the side deck, and White Magical Hat, and Premature. Like, a lot of interesting cards in the side deck, but you can definitely tell by the main deck, it is a fairly solid deck, all things considered. Cards that can refresh stuff. You got your Fiber Jar, one of the craziest cards in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! But you can see the difference between this deck, this 3rd place deck, and the 1st place deck. There are a couple of key cards that drop the consistency rate of this deck and drop the combo potential of this deck that might have propelled it to that 1st place. Now, maybe just swapping out Nimmo Momonga with Mystic Tomato would be enough. I'm not entirely sure. Of course, player skill and luck of the draw are factors that you have to keep in mind with this. But I definitely want to talk about a deck that wasn't just a 1st place deck that everyone's probably seen in their life, and talk about why this deck, I don't want to say failed, but didn't do as good as it possibly could, which is, of course, 1st place and getting that sweet Victory Dragon prize card. So let me know what you think about this deck. Do you think it's kind of interesting? What other decks like to see in the future? Definitely let me know. And until I see you next time, have a wonderful day.